This is a legacy episode of the Lesbian Historic Motif podcast, originally released as part of the Lesbian Talk Show podcast group. Some references may be obsolete. The show looks at lesbian-relevant themes in history and literature, has interviews and discussions about current historical fiction with queer female characters, including fantastic versions of the past, and presents new original historical fiction for your enjoyment. Last week, we had Katharine Duckett on the show to talk about her own historic writing with queer female characters. In this segment, she's here to talk about some works in the field that she's particularly enjoyed. Welcome back, Katharine.
Hello.
So, tell us about the books you like.
So, the first book that I want to talk about is one that I loved when it came out, and I'm actually rereading right now, and that is The Last Nude by Ellis Avery. And this is a terrific novel that is a real takeoff on the real history of Tamara de Lempicka, who's a terrific artist, queer artist, and who was living in Paris in the 1920s.
Okay.
And so this novel is steeped in the history of that time and has many amazing shout-outs to real history in Paris at that time, Shakespeare and co. And it's just beautifully written, a really lovely story of someone, discovering their own sexuality, and the real history of this artist who actually has long been one of my favorite artists.
Yeah, that was a fabulous time for queer women in Paris, as I recall.
Yes.
So, next book.
The next book is actually a novella, and this one is Passing Strange by Ellen Klages.
Oh, yes. We had her on the show.
Yeah. I was lucky enough to work on this actually when I was working at Tour.com in publicity, so that was such a treat to get to work on this book. This book unfolds in 1940 in San Francisco. Such a fascinating time for the queer community. San Francisco, obviously, a bastion of queer culture, long a haven for queer people. And it's just so, I think, alive with the sense of these real women and their real relationships and their real struggles. It brings in also the history of the pulps, which is fascinating. And as someone who's been long a science fiction, fantasy, and genre fan, that was something I loved as well. So, and there's a touch of magic as well. So it's just, it's a really lovely story.
Yeah, I really enjoyed having Ellen on the show to talk about it, and it's been so lovely seeing it gather all the awards.
Yes, it's great. And then my third book is another incredible historical fiction story. This one, like my book, draws on real history, but then also draws in a lot about what can't be known about certain things of the period. And that is Hild by Nicola Griffith.
Ah, yeah.
Yes. So that is this great exploration of the life of this woman who clearly was this incredible, intelligent.
Let's remind the listeners where and when it's set.
Yes. So in 7th century Britain, Hild was actually a woman who was basically someone who clearly had quite a lot of power and insight and was a very learned person, but we know very little about her. And Nicola Griffith actually writes quite a lot about this on her blog and wrote as she was writing the book about how little is extant in the historical record about this person. And so from what little is available, she creates this tome, really. I have the hardback, and it's just a beautiful text that explores what this woman's life might have been like and what life as a queer woman might have been like for her at the time. And it's just an incredibly detailed vision of life at that time from what little is actually known.
And she envisions a approach to sexuality that it's a imagined approach, but how queer sexuality might fit into Anglo-Saxon society at a time on the cusp between the pre-Christian society and the introduction of Christianity. And it's a very lovely way of imagining other settings, other categorizations.
Yes, and not defined by our idea of sexuality as it stands now. And so it's just a really, really amazing look at that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. So, thank you so much for sharing some of your favorite historical books with queer women with us.
Thanks.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Lesbian Historic Motif podcast. See the show notes for links to people and topics. Most shows will have a transcript linked as well. If you have a book announcement, a topic suggestion, or might like to appear on the show, please drop me an email. If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate it and subscribe on your favorite podcast app, and consider supporting our Patreon.